The James Show Podcast.
We have a little more movement on our top story of the day, Iran versus Israel. Do we dare call it a war yet? I mean, there's definitely some acts of war that are going on. But you've also are quite aware with the pattern that we don't really go to Congress anymore and get an official declaration of war. That's just what they have in the Constitution. And who follows that dumb old document anyway? That's sarcasm there for the people who are about to fire off an angry email. But in keeping up with this, the activity is sort of diminishing by the day. There was another salvo of missiles fired from Iran into Israel yesterday. The count I see in most reports is around 30 for however accurate wartime statistics have been. And so this follows the theory that I've sort of jumped my bandwagon on and said Iran just can't keep this up. They have a limited amount of missiles. They've probably fired, I don't know if most of them, but they fired a lot and they can't replenish them as fast as they're firing them. Plus, they're losing a whole bunch because they're tending to get blown up by Israeli missiles, and some of the delivery mechanisms have been compromised in airstrikes and whatnot too, drone strikes, who knows. So I don't think this is going to be the next forever war. We're not going to be here for 20 years like Afghanistan. But what's the next move? That's huge. I don't think anybody has the stomach for one American boot to be on the ground. This whole garbage, we're just going to send some advisors or a peacekeeping force. No, and no. But there is a little wiggle room between for escalation between that boundary and where we're at now. Now, a funny thing with the media, this happens with every conflict, every military action. Doesn't matter who's in office. This isn't them like being anti-Trump. But you almost can't blame them for asking really stupid questions in a wartime scenario. I remember all the way back in the first Gulf War, what was that, like 91? 92. Saturday Night Live did a joke where there was a press conference with Norman Schwarzkopf and the reporters were asking ridiculous questions like, are you planning an amphibious assault? If so, where is it going to land and when? So I can't answer that, actually. So we start off the important audio of the day with Trump fielding one of those questions, and it always cracks me up because they have to ask, and you can't blame them because if you get an answer, it's going to be the biggest headline of the day. But Trump doesn't fall for it for a second, but does offer a little bit of insight past that question.
Have you been answered questions about whether you are moving closer or you believe the U.S. is moving closer to striking Iranian nuclear facilities? Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch? I mean, you don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble.
All right, so that was a fun start. But here's the takeaway that most of the media is running with today is I put two questions back to back together here where he says Iran is defenseless. They got nothing going on. And if this is true, if he's just not barking out there for media narrative control purposes, that Iran has to come to the table if this is true.
Yeah, but they've suggested that they come to the White House. That's, courageous, but, it's like not easy for them to do. But they suggest, because I can't go now because of what's going on. I had to come back early from the G7, which was terrific, by the way, in Canada. Really terrific. Good people.
Is there a possibility of next week or sooner that
Well, I don't know how much longer it's going to go on. I mean, they're totally defenseless. They have no air defense whatsoever. We've totally captured. We've totally captured the air, Brian.
So did you catch that? They're totally defenseless, and we've captured their airspace. That's huge. If they're totally defenseless, how does Iran keep going on? Now, I'm not saying the Ayatollahs are going to say, well, you got me. I'm going to resign now and step down and we'll have a peaceful transition of power. No, they'll come to the table and they'll negotiate whatever it takes for them to stay in power with, as much pride as they can keep intact. But there was another fun comment that's not being played by other news outlets. I think you'd be interested in this because he says this would have never happened had he been in power. October 7th would have never happened had he been in power. Putin invading Ukraine wouldn't have happened had he been in power at the time. And then it kind of delved off. He chased the rabbit here talking about Putin. I think you'd be interested in this.
Putin would have never done it. And I spoke to him yesterday, and I said, he actually offered to help mediate. I said, do me a favor. Mediate your own. Let's mediate Russia first, okay? I said, Vladimir, let's mediate Russia first. You can worry about this later. But I think that's going to work out, too. But so many people have been killed. The big thing with that one is far more people are dead than have been reported in the Ukraine, Russia. Many, many more people. A building falls down, they say nobody was hurt. So.
Ooh, did you get that? He, he has information we don't have access to, and whenever they say in the media, a building fell and no one died, he probably has someone on the ground or some intelligence apparatus that's coming back to him and saying, no, there were a bunch of people that died. Russia's lying about it because they don't want it to look bad in the media. But he doesn't want to go out and start calling out Russia. For one thing, he doesn't want to antagonize them. What does it matter to us what the body count was on a busted up building somewhere in Western Russia? But also, you don't want to compromise your sources there on information. But I think he's right. We're going to find out this was a whole lot worse whenever it's over and we get a more sober accounting of the events that have happened in both October 7th, the subsequent Gaza-Israeli war, Russia-Ukraine. This is all probably a lot uglier than we are experiencing right now. The truth is probably a lot uglier than what we see on TV. All right, coming up, my next guest, Chris Putnam. He's from the Dallas Express, but he knows some people in D.C. He has a insider's look on how much the Trump team is willing to get involved in Iran. Well, my next guest is usually on talking about local or state issues. He's the guy who runs the Dallas Express, dallasexpress.com. But Chris Putnam also happens to know people in D.C. and is pretty good at putting his finger to the wind on what's going on behind the curtain up there. And Chris Putnam, I've noticed on social media and even among anecdotally speaking, my friend group, how there seems to be a divide among Team Red. Some of the same people that wear the same hats, they both wear MAGA hats. One doesn't mind if we get involved in Iran. The other one wants to stay out of it at all costs. Do you sense a similar divide in the State Department?
Yeah, I absolutely believe it's there. And of course, some of those disagreements are manifested in the president and Elon Musk getting into it very publicly, as you well know. And a lot of the origins of that blow up occurred in the State Department, with USAID in particular. That was kind of the origin of, some of those disagreements. And those were discussions or debates about what to cut and how much to cut. And, ultimately, resulted in, some change out leadership there at the level below Rubio, and the debate's still going on. And the Iranian thing, very similar. I think you have, a large number of people that, were really much supportive of Trump's commitment to stay out of foreign wars. And, there's a lot of folks still left in the administration that are more on the neocon side and want more aggressive intervention.
So I find that incredibly disappointing. When people talk about there's a deep state in D.C. that no matter who's in power, the same old game is going to keep getting played. I feel like this is a great example of that. We even have Elon Musk come through, pick out all these Doge cuts, and there's people on Team Red that don't have his back on cutting USAID.
Yeah, we actually did a story about it this morning, I believe. Again, sourcing directly from some pretty senior folks in that department. I think a lot of us would say that Marco Rubio to date, has been one of the more impressive cabinet members, if not the most impressive. But in the last month or so, what we reported is he was pressured by some of his former Senate colleagues to not cut certain programs in their states. And some of those programs, good researchers like Data Republican X have basically tracked back to King State protests. So some of the NGOs that are still receiving funds or received funds earlier in the year before they shrank their budgets or eliminated them completely, helped organize and pay for those nationwide events.
All right, we're talking with Chris Putnam from DallasExpress.com. Explain to me again, my tax dollars help fund the King's Day, the No Kings protest in a country that doesn't have kings. That's great. That's fantastic.
It's as you well know, it's a pretty complex money laundering, organization. One way it goes to these NGOs, some of them are international. And the LA riots and the King's Day events were definitely funded separately. The LA money mostly came from China, believe it or not, from the CCP, to a gentleman who is an American, but expats and lives in Shanghai. And he then routes CCP money back to the NGOs here in the United States that help pay for some of that.
Well, the people are asking for cuts, and when cuts are proposed and identified and they're just not codified, it seems like the anti-cut faction is winning. Whatever internecine and civil war we have within Team Red, it is the cutters that are losing.
Yeah, to me, it just feels very much like 2016 right now. And the disappointing thing is they came in with a great plan and violently executed that plan. And to your
violently?
Point, yeah. Well,
you mean valiantly?
I always talk in terms of violent execution, but now it's hit the wall. I mean, it's hit the wall with activist judges, and then you got a lot of Congress people, screaming about that money leaving their state, and on both sides of the aisle. By the way, our understanding is, Marco was persuaded by folks from both parties, and as you well know, the Senate is very collegial. You don't see a lot of the rough and tumble, politics or back and forth publicly in the Senate typically that you do in the House. And so a lot of these folks have worked together in some cases for decades. They're friends. And and so, now it looks like, that's one way the deep state manifests itself, right? And we go on and on all day about the dysfunction in Congress and reforms that are
required. Right, but Chris, I'm seeing a connection between these people who don't want the cuts and these people who are really hawkish on the Iran situation.
It's the same group of people.
That was my suspicion.
It's definitely the same group of people.
So what is their bit? They just pretend to be Republicans and support more and bigger government?
Haven't we seen that for a lot of years, particularly in Congress?
And do we just see it in Austin, too?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
In the House there, yeah.
So this is Chris Putnam from DallasExpress.com. Yeah, so the same thing's happening. Republican voters who want a smaller government, they vote for Republicans, and they send them to either Austin or D.C., and they kind of tinker with some social issues, maybe an abortion law here or maybe a trans issue here, but they never actually cut the government. I know this is an impossible question, but Chris Putnam, what is a limited government conservative to do?
Make a lot of noise, I suppose. I mean, all we can ask folks to do is, call their Congress people and apply as much pressure as possible. I mean, we voted for one thing and we are not getting it right now. And as you said, it's been explained to me that literally not a single EO has been fully implemented, not fully. And then certainly none of them have been codified in the legislature, right? And I always like to remind people, the Republicans wasted the first 2 years of Trump's first administration when they had control of both houses of Congress and the presidency. The president ran on border security and immigration reform. We got nothing. And that Republican inaction in 2016-17, I would argue, led directly to the crisis that we then had at the border under the Biden administration.
Well, I would put one caveat in it. You're overall correct, but we did get the Tax Cut and Jobs Act at the end of 2017.
That was the exception.
And they at least brought a bill to vote on repealing Obamacare, and it passed in the House, and it would have passed in the Senate if John McCain historically did his little thumbs down. Just really, was that a spite to Trump, or does he really feel strongly about the efficacy of Obamacare? We'll never know because he's passed away now. But they're not even talking about getting rid of Obamacare now. I find this all very frustrating.
I know, right? Right. Yeah, they've done very little. I mean, the big, beautiful bill, of course, is in the Senate. Who knows what's going to happen there? But as you know, even that bill doesn't reduce the deficit. It doesn't balance or even attempt to balance the budget.
Nope.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of conservatives are getting frustrated. I mean, and throw in the Epstein files, right? So we were promised day one. Where are they? And I think you and I might have talked about it once before. That interview that Bongino and Cash had was disturbing.
It was a hostage tape, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the.
Now, I know this isn't our top story of the day because we're kind of focused on Iran and Israel to start with, and we'll continue that in just a second. But you were embedded with some of the protests that happened in our backyard over the weekend. Let's talk about something local real quick while I have you for a few more minutes here. Chris Putnam from Dallas Express, what did you see while you were embedded?
Oh, it was entertaining. I actually did a bit of recon an hour before the event, and the first interesting thing that I saw was a line of folks that were queued up that were getting packages handed to them, and I couldn't tell you what were in the packages, but ironically, they were delivering these packages, this line of protesters, out of the back of the Cybertruck, which was one of the very things that they were protesting. So that was amusing. It was a lot of stuff that you would expect. A lot of F Trump chants, and there were some chants in Spanish. You had the Free Palestine crowd there. You had, folks opposed to deportation there. And then you just have, a lot of people just hate Trump there, of course, and Elon. But it was actually a very diverse crowd. I was surprised because I heard this was true nationwide. Lots of senior citizens. And it was a hot day. And I mean, those poor folks were passed out on the sidewalks all over downtown.
Do you have an explanation on why the demographics for this skewed so old?
Well, I've heard theories, right? I mean, one is that, a lot of baby boom generation folks, they source their media information from legacy news outlets, right? And as you know, the legacy media has been whipping people into an absolute frenzy, over most of these issues. And they don't have access to platforms like yours necessarily, or certainly X and, a lot of the independent journalists that can be trusted now.
All right. Chris Putnam, DallasExpress.com is his website. It's a fantastic newspaper, part of the daily rotation on what I do for James Show Prep. I appreciate your time, sir.
We appreciate you too, James. Thanks so much.
All right, now coming back to our top story of the day is this Iran situation. Let's talk about where we draw the line here, because you don't want to be figuring it out in real time. You want to already know what you think is too far. And where I draw the line, I think let's start off with no boots on the ground. Does everyone agree that we don't want any American troops on the ground in Iran? We don't want an amphibious invasion. We don't want any scouts there. We don't want any advisors. We don't want any peacekeepers. We don't want anyone just there for humanitarian aid purpose. No, none. Do we all agree with that? Now, secondly, where do I draw the line? I don't like the idea of us shooting missiles from our boats or our missile launchers or our facilities. I don't mind selling them to Israel. And they, hey, here's the missile you need. It's X amount of dollars. If you need a line of credit, cool. Maybe we'll do a Lend-Lease program. But I don't like getting directly involved. I'm quite comfortable just selling Israel whatever weapons they need. If they need some intelligence, do we have to put people on the ground in there? Can we still follow our regular, just whatever intelligence we have? Yeah, we'll share it with you. We're not going to do anything special to get it. We're not going to be sending in undercover CIA guys or the Delta Force or something to go get intelligence. No, it'll just be the same old hands off, maybe some drones, maybe some satellites, maybe skimming some of the data that's floating through their fiber optic cables. But I find our unease in this situation stems from Congress just refusing to declare war anymore. You hear that we haven't officially declared war since World War II, but we have had something similar to that. Like when we went into Afghanistan, there was a bill that was called something to the effect of the congressional authorization of military force in Afghanistan. Now, if that's not a declaration of war, I don't know what is. Why don't they just call that a declaration of war? Now, if you try and answer your own rhetorical question, you come up with a political answer, and that stinks. Because if the war goes south, you don't want someone being on the hook for saying, oh, yeah, I supported that war. It's something that'll be used against them. It's something that'll be thrown in their face. Same reason they like all these omnibus bills, and they'll vote for them, even though there's a ton of stuff in there that their voters, the people they're representing, their constituents would find abhorrent. Well, they can get away with it for political purposes, just like they're getting away with, oh, we're not going to declare war. We will, fund it, and we will have bills that go through the House and the Senate, and it'll be called the authorization for military use in Iran. But if the Iran war goes south, if it turns into sour milk, they can keep their hands clean politically, and they don't have to worry about getting beat upside the head with it at the next debate. That's terrible. We have to do better. But I do like the idea of we can maybe squeeze Iran, because it seems like the ultimate goal for Donald Trump is to get some regime change without any boots on the ground, without having to escalate, without having to do an occupation or land any of our forces on the ground. Can we do that? Can we get a real change? Because so many problems are solved if Iran gets better leadership, gets a better system of governance, if they drop this whole theocratic garbage. Because, the Iran funding terror goes away, which means the Houthi rebels go away. Hamas pretty much goes away. Hezbollah neutered as well. The ISIS rebels that were in the hinterlands of Syria, gone. The bad actors that are keeping Libya and Egypt on their heels, gone. But also there's some bigger macroeconomic things that will happen, because who else will sell oil to China or North Korea if we want to put sanctions on them or blockade them? If everybody's in the same oil pool and no one's a rogue actor like Iran, we could really crunch just about anyone diplomatically by squeezing oil if Iran becomes a partner instead of an adversary. Right now, the number one buyer of Iranian oil, China, and they get it on a huge discount because of the sanctions. So I'm pretty optimistic about where we're going to be a year from now. Let's just see, because I think we actually might find out in about a month or so where this is going to go. Now, we know Iran and Israel have a conflict that's going to end up in the history books, but how does this affect you? Well, the first and most immediate way is probably going to be at the pump. We've already seen a small spike in the price of oil since this whole thing popped off, and my next guest can share a little more depth on that. RT Trevino from the Crude Truth podcast and also Pecos Country Energy. Welcome back to the James Show. And what do you think? I know you don't have a crystal ball, kind of an impossible question, but how bad do you think it's going to get, RT?
Well, you talk about the history books. Obviously, this fight has been going on since, if you read the Bible, since then, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to officially stop anytime soon. These two are at a place right now, and we definitely don't need Iran to have nuclear capabilities for any reason at all. We've seen the damage that true nuclear weapons can have in this world. And on the upside, we've seen all the good that nuclear power can provide to this world. So that's the way of the world that we need to move. But that being said, right now, they're still jabbing at each other, which is unfortunate. Prayers out to our brothers and sisters in Israel and across the Middle East. However, we have seen the price spike now almost 6%. We saw a large spike last Friday, James, and it came back down. And the reason why it came back down, James, is because you saw the fear in the markets, but then you saw the true American oil and gas worker that is in the oil and gas industry bring that price back down. It's because of the 14 million barrels of oil a day that we produce here in America that the price of oil has not gone up.
Well, RT, you brought up the biblical history between Israel and Iran. They were actually pretty friendly in biblical times. The Persians were the ones that brought them out of exile from Babylon and let them rebuild the city and gave them about a millennia of religious freedom there. So, when you bring up the Bible, they were both characters in the Bible, but they were a lot more friendly back then.
They were, but the Persians are actually who the Trump administration is the most worried about. And it's not Iran and the people of Iran. It's that Persian group that's the most concerning to the world right now.
So let's talk about from your side of the equation here, the oil patch from Texas. Generally speaking, when prices go up just a little bit, that's kind of good for y'all.
Hey, it's always a great thing. However, again, for reasons like this, I could do without the bump in the oil prices. In fact, I had a great article a couple of days ago on my Substack where I even mentioned that people out there right now that are saying invest in oil, it's about to go up to $100. Shame on you, because that is people's lives that are at stake when that happens, and there's no need for that. We are right now at about $75 oil, James, which is right there in that prime spot, that $70 to $85 prime spot where us as oil and gas producers can make money, the service companies can make money, but most importantly, the American economy can continue to grow and thrive. And that's the name of the game. As strong as the United States economy goes, the rest of the world is going to go. And that's why the $75 price is so important and such a good price for the United States.
All right, we're talking with RT Trevino from the Crude Truth podcast and Pecos Country Energy. Are consumers, the people listening, are they going to see the price of gas go up because of this?
Yes. I was on another show the other day, and I said that, hey, if you see anybody in any gas stations that are completely out of whack right now, please don't go there. That is true gouging. However, we will see the price go up just a little bit. I know last week diesel was actually under $3 for the first time in a long time here at DFW area. However, prices have gone up. So over the next 2 to 3 weeks, we will see a small increase. However, I don't think it's anything that's going to be super significant, barring, again, another incident like we have right now in the Middle East.
What effect would it have on the worldwide oil market if Iran became a good player and they didn't have to worry about all these sanctions and selling extra cheap to China, and they could just be a regular guy that's just contributing to the global market?
That's a great question. And if we actually got to that point, we would see this price of oil still in that $65 to $75 range. They're producing right now, they're the fourth largest producer of OPEC, and they're producing approximately about 3.3 million barrels of oil a day right now. And they're exporting the majority of that, like you said, over to China. So if they could just continue to produce at a fair value price, which is higher than what they're doing, which would need to be higher than what they're sending to China, then they would actually be at a great spot, continue to produce to make a dollar, and really not disrupt the oil and gas global market.
All right. Well, RT Trevino, if prices get too high, we're going to blame you, okay?
No.
Just have fun.
I appreciate it. Thank you as always.
All right. What's coming up on the Crude Truth podcast?
Man, thanks for asking. I just had on the Texas Land Commissioner, Dr. Don Buckingham, and we talked about how important the produced water will become in West Texas. That's the water that comes out of the ground when you produce oil. Also, it might even help with crops and drinking water. As we know, the West Texas has a water shortage already. And then I've had on a great guy named Vasily Borhoff of Houston, and he probably has game-changing drilling technology for all the major drilling companies out there in the world.
Okay, well, a lot to look forward to. This is RT Trevino from Pecos Country Energy, and his podcast is called The Crude Truth. Brilliant name for an oil-based podcast. Thank you very much, RT.
Thank you as always, James.
All right. Let me ask you some of the same questions I was asking my last two guests. Like, where do you draw the line on this Israel-Iran war? Do you want us to support it even if it costs, say, more than $1 trillion or $200 billion, which is about what we spent on Ukraine, give or take a few billion, as funny as that sounds? Would you still be okay with the Israel-Iran war if it doubled the price of your gasoline at the pump? Would you still be okay with our activities over in the Middle East if it slowed down our economy? I just want to hear where you draw the line. I like being just the supplier for Israel and not getting any more involved in that. No direct strikes from us. We'll just maybe supply some weapons and intelligence. And if it doesn't cost too much, I'm kind of okay. But where do you draw the line? I'm James Parker on News Talk 820 and 93.3 FM WBAP.
The James Show Podcast.